Whether it takes the form of our capitalist system that periodically crashes and thrusts millions upon millions of people into such great tumult and difficulty, or whether it's our incredibly erroneous politicians through their own actions and corruption aiding and abetting the people that actually rule this society into pushing us further and further into dystopia. Contradictions are incredibly prevalent in American society, and that's what we'll take a look at in this video, specifically pertaining to the US and Iran. You won't be surprised by this. So, as we know, there is an ongoing war in Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine is aided by, most notably, the US, NATO, and their allies. And what they're fighting against is essentially Russia, of course, most notably, and sidebar, one could add and should add the People's Republic of China. But we'll put them aside for this video. But that is the current conflict that's going on in Ukraine. And there has been vast, as we'll get into, shipments of weapons and money going to Ukraine for the war effort in order to help them. All of this has been coined aid and help and for defense. All of these terms that are very, very, very they cherry pick these terms to make it seem like it's something that should happen and has to happen, and this is for the better of the people of Ukraine and for the world as a whole. As our political leaders have told us, we're all united on this issue. That couldn't be anything further than the truth, but that is the current leading ideologies, not only in the United States, but in the allied countries as well. But something interesting has recently happened. The United States, who has been shoveling, and by the way, this money and cash and all this aid that's going to Ukraine is really going to the military industrial complex. But the United States, the US, has intercepted Iranian shipments of 2,000 assault rifles destined for Yemen. So if you aren't aware, and I don't know how you aren't because it's probably the most acute crisis that's going on, human rights crisis going on in the world currently, the people, the Yemeni people, are suffering a genocide at the hands of Saudi Arabia, of course, aided by the United States, the UK, and a plethora of others. But you see, the people of Yemen aren't seemingly as deserving of the aid, especially as it comes from an enemy state, so they would be called Iran. But I want to read to you this article, and then I want to really put onto display this contradiction, and we'll talk about something that I've spoken of in the past, especially. So the article goes as follows. The U.S. intercepted a shipment of more than 2,000 Iranian assault rifles destined for Yemen, according to a statement from the U.S. military. The interception took place in international waters in the Gulf of Oman on Monday, U.S. Central Command said. A team from the USS Chinook, a patrol coastal vessel, boarded the other ship along a route historically used to smuggle weapons from Iran to the Houthis in Yemen. A photo from the USS Sullivan shows the 2,116 assault rifles covering the deck of the guided missile destroyer. The illegal flow of weapons from Iran through international waterways has a destabilizing effect on the region, said General Michael Eric Kurilla, the commander of the U.S. Central Command. Yemen has been engulfed in a devastating civil war since 2015, which has plunged the Gulf country into what has long been identified by aid groups as one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Iran has supported the Houthis, a rebel group who overthrew the government at the start of the war against a coalition led by Saudi Arabia and aided by U.S. military support. The war between the two factions has brutalized the country, leading to a widespread poverty and famine and tens of thousands of civilian casualties. So I won't read much more of this. I will note, though, as this article says, in November, the Navy seized what it described as a large quantity of explosives from a fishing vessel in the Gulf of Oman. So they're stopping these shipments of weapons and aid and whatever else coming from the Iranians to the Yemenis. Now, of course, as you could have garnered from this article, the people of Iran um, ally, whether it be ideologically or whatever else, with the people in Yemen, which is why they're helping them. But notice the contradiction here. So, people, victims in Yemen, aren't worthy of aid, but the people, the victims in Ukraine, are. Well, this brings about something that I spoke about previously in the past. It's one of my more popular videos on this channel, one in which I did a bit of analyzing and kind of fleshed out a term that Mr. Edward Sherman, and I believe it's Herman or Sherman, I'm sorry, Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky in their incredibly famous book, Manufactured Consent, that I really would recommend that you read if you haven't. It's truly a piece of work, and it's a legendary book. But they talked about this term, or they coined this term in that book, called unworthy and worthy victims. And I talked about in my video about certain worthy and unworthy victims that I thought were notable to speak of at the time. Well, here's another case. We have worthy victims deemed worthy by a particular state, that being the US and Ukraine. And you can guess, and I won't do that here in this video, why they deem those victims to be worthy victims. But of course, most glaringly, we have the unworthy victims in Iran, where we have to stop weapon shipments going there, but we have to continue to shovel weapons and money into Ukraine, threatening the world with nuclear war and utter catastrophe. But while we're on the subject of this aid and these weapons going this in that place, let's go into a little bit of how much aid exactly has the US sent to Ukraine. Okay, so this is from the middle of December. And so I believe, of course, we're in January of a new year, but since the middle of December, the amount of money that the U.S. has given to Ukraine in aid has totaled around $48 billion. So it's 9.9 billion in humanitarian aid, 15.1 billion in financial. There's billions in security assistance, weapons, grants and loans, and all this other stuff. And a little bit of what this entails is you have infantry and arms and equipment, you have artillery, tanks and armored carriers. I mean, things that I could hardly even pronounce. You have thousands of Humvees, trucks, trailers, air defense, air to ground missiles, manned aircraft, explosive drones, 700 switchblade drones, surveillance drones, coastal defense. And the list goes on of things that they've given Ukraine in terms of aid, in terms of defense. But this glaring contradiction, if you are a state or a people whose ideology does not align with the US, and therefore your interests do not align with the US, well then you are not deserving of aid. You are not deserving of help. You are not deserving of pretty much anything except for your own destruction. And so they will sit here and not just allow, but help your enemies destroy you, that being Saudi Arabia, wipe out the Yemeni population. But we will help the people in Ukraine while they fight their battle because we dislike the people that they're fighting against. So we'll lock arms with them. But when it comes to the Yemenis, well, we're going to have to stop these weapon shipments because they're illegal, and it upsets certain regions of the world. And they'll come up with all types of bullshit to justify these incredibly contradictory actions here. But this is another prime example of the U.S. state dictating who's worthy and unworthy of being a victim. You know, it's the same thing when it comes to the conflict in, you know, regarding Israel and the people of Palestine. Certain victims are worthy, others are extremely unworthy. The same thing goes for many other populations. I mean, the list literally goes on. But this is something that I wanted to discuss because it's a glaring contradiction, and it's a really important topic because it really goes to show you that the arguments that these people make in order to prolong these wars, to prolong these erroneous policies, really don't have a single leg to stand on.